Hey y'all, welcome to Bleducation, where we teach you about people you should know about, and if you already know them, you'll learn more about. I'm Tamia, and this is my co-host.
I am Brandon, and I am happy to be here.
Right, so we're gonna go ahead and kick y'all off. We don't want to waste none of y'all's time. Today, we're gonna get started with Bayard Rustin. And essentially, what we're going to be talking about is some of his upbringing, some of the challenges that he faced being a part of the civil rights movement, specifically focusing on his identity as a queer Black male. So we'll be talking a lot about like intersectionality and how that played a part in who he was in the civil rights movement and how that affected his role essentially. Yeah,
and we're going to drag the civil rights movement a little bit.
Because why would we get off scot free? It just doesn't seem fair.
Let's get into some things. Okay. You want to take it away?
I got you. So I'm gonna start y'all off with some background information. Just talking about the impacts of his life before he got big and famous.
Okay.
So he was born March 17th, 1912 in West Chase, Philly. And he was actually born to obviously his parents, but he was raised by his grandparents. And he had a huge family. He had like 12 siblings. But what we saw is that his grandparents had a really big impact on his life, mainly because both his grandmother and his grandfather were Quakers. His grandmother was a part of the NAACP. And she was like big time. Yeah, he had like big popping for real. She had like W.E.B. Du Bois coming to her crib, like kicking it with them. So he had a really big influence for people that played a big role in like what it meant to be a Black American at that time. So that really kind of impacted the way he moved throughout his life. So he ends up obviously leaving home, goes off to college and things like that. And what we see happen is he actually joins the YCL, which is the Young Communist League. Right, the communists. But when he joins this, he obviously thinks that they're going to be focusing on like civil rights and things like that. But essentially, what ends up happening is they take their focus off of that, and they are actually focused on like spreading what people would call like the Communist Manifesto at the time. So he does leave this group, but it puts a big stain on him just coming straight out the gate. And essentially the reason behind that is because we know like Second Red Scare, the sphere of communism, looking at the major wars that we're participating in as the United States, that the whole idea of communists in Russia at the time and China, they're just like, they can't take
McCarthy.
No, we don't have time for Joseph McCarthy. Don't even do that to me because that's my favorite topic. But just this idea of communism, this shared wealth and things like that is really scary to the United States, especially this man was Black, aligning himself with communists. Same thing we see with Angela Davis. It's a big fear that they have. So that puts a stain on him like fresh out of college. But we are going to see him still go on. He goes on to co-found CORE, as well as be a part of planning big things for the civil rights movement. So the 1941 March on Washington, that unfortunately actually didn't happen. But that's like a precursor to what we see later on with our big March on Washington for jobs and freedom and things like that. And then unfortunately we hit 1953, and this is where he has his first arrest, and he's actually arrested for sleeping with a man that he serves 50 days in a chain gang.
So, crazy.
Yeah. No, that was actually really wild because, like, being a queer person now, I can't imagine somebody just being like, "Oh, you holding hands with your girlfriend?
Yeah,
lock her up.
You're going to jail. You are going to jail.
Like what? Yeah, no,
it's pretty crazy.
That blew my mind. But this is a really big turning point. So I've already talked about, he has a stain on him from, aligning himself with communists and things like that. And then he gets arrested. Right. So he's already this super big figure because we have CORE at this time. They're doing like sit-ins, the freedom rides, like to protest against, civil rights and things like that. And then he gets arrested. And this is kind of where we see his life take a big spin, mainly because of his position that he's going to take on, and how a lot of people are just not gonna be with it, and it's mainly because he's a Black gay man. So I'm gonna give it over to my partner to read the tale.
Yes, you said some pretty interesting things as far as like him having to kind of like step out of the spotlight and take a back role. When we look at the civil rights movement, a lot of it was based off of the church. Clearly MLK was a renowned pastor, who had his own sins, but we won't get into that, about how he was sleeping with white women. But Bayard Rustin is, of course, homosexuality is just this terrible thing in our community. So that's the biggest sin. And you still see that even today, like where people talk about sin, the first thing that pastors want to preach about is homosexuality, but they don't want to talk about adultery or, all the other things, because if you're going to hell, you're going to hell. But anyways, back on track though. So Bayard Rustin, he does take a background. because of this, and so, some of it is self-imposed, which I really, really do hate.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it was influenced by the civil rights movement. Even when we go back, everyone knows like Rosa Parks, like she's a household name, but you have to go back and think about Claudette Colvin, who was a dark-skinned teenager who essentially did the same thing that Rosa Parks did and refused to give her a seat.
She was like 15, right?
Yeah, she was like 15, and she was also unwed and she was pregnant, and they just didn't want her to be the face of the civil rights movement. And one of the things that they said was like, "Oh yeah, white people are going to eat this up," like her being, unwed and pregnant at the time. So, it makes me think the civil rights movement, some of it was about visibility and respectability politics, but
okay, but I don't. Far be it for me to cape for him, please. But I do have to think about because nowadays, the time we frown upon this respectability politics, right?
Yeah.
But it's I really do wonder if it was necessary for them to get what they needed. Had it been Claudette? Mm-hmm. Would it have been the story of her not getting up on the bus, or would it have been the story of this young?
I get what you're saying.
You feel me?
So the focus would have been on something different.
I absolutely think that it's egregious, the way that they did things back then. And even when you look at Bayard Rustin, because he's not a household name, you have to wonder if that's how that would have turned out if he was. I guess.
So what you're saying is they put him on the back burner because they didn't want that to be the focus.
Right. And it's
so I totally get that.
It's that same thing you hear about. It's now we're that's dumb. But when they're you have to pick your side almost. Mm-hmm. And it's at that point in time, the big fight was just for civil rights as it applied to your country.
Yeah,
I hate to be that guy.
I hear you on that.
You make me devil's advocate.
So let's do it. But Martin King Jr., what was he doing? He was cheating on his wife every other day, and it was an open secret. He literally was sleeping with white women. There was something where he had a scandal where apparently a woman was sexually assaulted, in a hotel room, and they swept all of that up. But Bayard Rustin, he's dead. He's gay, so he can't. What? No.
I'm just saying. I'm trying to give perspective to the
Got
situation.
Got it. No. I totally get it.
Don't make me a bad guy. I don't agree.
I'm looking at this in my 2022 mind, and I'm not thinking 1950.
Exactly.
So I totally get it. I do have a little bias there.
We have a lot of bias, and I can recognize that, and I still think that it's wrong, especially because at this time we do have white queers that are fighting for their own rights. So for them, they get that chance to be this is our focus, this is what we're going to harp on. But we're still dealing with, Jim Crow almost. Pretty much at this time. You feel me?
Yeah, so it's very interesting that you bring up white queers, because I think when we talk about the LGBT community, or Q+, community, a lot of people in the Black community, especially cis and hetero people, mm-hmm. they think of it in terms of a white problem, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this term called intersectionality that's going to be coined by Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989. Mm-hmm. Shout out to 1989, a great year. That's when I was born.
95 was better, but
it's okay. It's okay. But intersectionality is basically just saying that you can be a part of more than one struggle, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people just don't have the idea that you can be a part of more than one struggle. Women in general are not going to hold as much privilege or power as men. We know that across the board. Yeah. But when you look at a Black woman, she has to deal with the fact that she is a woman, mm-hmm. right? And that Black men inherently hold privilege hold privilege at just being a man. And even I was on Facebook the other day debating, and Black men just love to be play victim, and they're Black women don't have as much we're on the equal playing field, and it's just no, Black women, even small stuff Black women have to monitor and police how they talk or how they even reject Black men, because they're getting killed because of that. And Black men don't have to generally deal with that kind of stuff.
And I think though the conversation with that is very similar to what we saw then. Though it's we have a new thing to focus on, so we only feel we need to focus on that one thing. So especially when we had that summer where it was every day we're turning on the news to see a Black man being killed, I think that really brought about this big conversation between what's the difference between being a Black woman and a Black man.
Right.
And I think a lot of that gets lost in translation. It's we can walk and chew gum at the same time, bro. It is super okay to not only advocate for racial injustices as well as sexuality and sexual orientation, things of that nature. And I think it's just hard for people to take on both of those things, which is why I love the word intersectionality, because it's basically setting you up to acknowledge the fact that you don't have to take these two battles separately. Like, I don't have to be Black one day, a woman one day, and queer the next day. Like, I'm all those things every day. So I think it's interesting to see how, like, that in particular has played itself out throughout history.
Well, when you look historically, I think that the Black community has just kind of always had an aversion when it deals with homosexuality, as far as in America, right? It goes back to there was something called buck breaking that happened where you have this idea of this strong Black man, which were referred to as bucks during that time. And so these plantation owners would essentially want to kind of break them down to make them be more docile and less defiant. So they would literally commit sexual acts. So they would either basically create a situation where there was rape happening, or they would rape them themselves. And they would do this in front of the whole community. So it's essentially, it does something to a man's pride, where you're having this stuff occur and happen. And what I think is, like, as you tell these stories from generation to generation, I can understand where the aversion or why maybe homosexuality is like the ultimate sin in the Black community versus something else.
So do you think when we talk about Bayard Rustin, it's that mind frame? It's like, oh, he's doing this one thing, so he can't be the strong one in the middle because of this identity that he has. And especially like if he's choosing to be that, or
absolutely. You have to think too. Even back, like, Black queer people didn't just appear, and even in certain time frames, like during the Harlem Renaissance, like there was, there were a lot of people, but it was just like kind of like an open secret. Like people may have known that this person did this, but I think his arrest, like, okay, so now it's like we can't sweep this under the rug. This is something that is national news. So now we have to address it, and it's almost like the civil rights movement is kind of like, okay, well, like, you can have your sins, you can do whatever you want, but as soon as it becomes something that can be weaponized against us or affect the movement, now you become a liability. And so I think with Bayard Rustin, this kind of happened. And let me tell you something, Bayard Rustin is a good one, because the moment they would have told me, like, oh, you gay?
You gotta go take a back seat.
Sit the back seat. Bye. I would have been gone. But, in retrospect, I really am happy that he still did continue the fight, because he was just so influential, even after the civil rights movement, with fighting for queer rights for Black people. And I really, really like that. I know that his story kind of ended, I believe it was in 1987.
Why would you throw a number at me like that? Like
I'm pretty sure it's 19. Yeah, I'm pretty sure
it was 1987.
Oh yeah, cool.
Why would you just say that to me out loud? Like, what if I didn't know?
One thing that I do like about him is that he just continued to push on. Fun fact, I also realized too, like, he had a lover for, I think, like the last 15 years of his life, and he ended up adopting him, like legally adopting his lover, so that. Because that was the only way legally that they could have any.
Like, they did an adult adoption?
Yeah, they did.
That is so wild.
Yeah, they did an adult. He adopted his lover so that, like,
he could have his name.
Yep. So I thought that was like really, really, really cool as well. But it just sucks that he had to kind of have to do all of that. And it just kind of sucks that even today we still deal with intersectionality issues where a lot of people in the Black community just kind of like will prioritize like race over something like sexuality. And I even hear those conversations that like sexuality is something that can be chosen. So that's why it's not as important. And you can't really change your race and different things like that. But it's just like there are multiple instances where...
My biggest issue with all of it is the fact that, like, it's an issue until I bring something to the table, right? So it's like the constant conversation of like, look at the choir directors. Everybody knows when nobody says anything, but as long as they're providing you a service, it's fine. Look at your hair, just, you know what I'm saying? And that's the same thing you saw with Bayard Rustin. Like, They, when I was doing my research, they talked about the fact that he's the one that actually went and visited Gandhi and brought back the principle of nonviolent civil disobedience. Like, and that is coined with Dr. King, and you would think that would be something that we would know that he did, because they talked about how, like, before Bayard Rustin went and, you know, found all these principles and brought them back to MLK. You know, he had guns in his home. You know, he was doing this, that, and the third, and all his security guards walk around with weapons on them. But after he teaches him this new way, he gets rid of all those things. Setting up the March on Washington, that's literally all on him. You know, and it's just such a shame because, again, I'm providing you a service, so it's fine. But if I'm no longer doing that, then I gotta go. Like, I'm the outcast. Like, that's fucked up.
It's
like,
even interesting that you say that, because even like with certain like when you brought up the hairdresser scenario, and it's just like my mom was like that, you know, where she was just like, oh, okay, like I don't mind like going to get my hair done and gossiping and stuff like that,
right.
but like I don't want my kid to be like this kind of thing.
Or
too.
I don't want it around me or my children.
Yeah,
like,
so it's like that's still literally a bias that you have, you know. But like societal norms just have Black people more likely to not come out the closet anyway, because of this pushback that you're gonna get, and because the Black community is so intertwined with religion, and that's like really like
you did it. I was gonna say it if you did it.
So it's just like, and so like I think that when it comes to privilege for white people that are LGBT, they have the privilege of being white, but they also kind of come from a community where it's more accepting to be open or to be yourself. And Black people, because a lot of Black people are kind of married with religion, you know, in some kind of aspect, you know, it was shunned upon. So like they don't come out the closet, and then they kind of.
It's always been one thing that I frowned upon the civil rights movement about it, because like, to me, it almost feels like a cop-out to be like, oh, we're going to base this on religion, because that's just an easy way for you to get rid of people that you don't want to be an issue. To me, that's what it's always felt like. And we have to acknowledge this fact of like, I'm wholeheartedly, I believe in the differentiation between like church and state. And while I understand that this is not like a federal issue that's coming down, like I think that that's still an important factor when you look at social movements, which is why one thing that I loved about the Black Lives Matter movement was that they were never, to me, what I saw, they were never actually attached to any type of religion or anything like that. It was just this movement of people coming together and being able to do this thing and fight against this one thing. And also acknowledging that some people may have identities that I don't share. Because again, with the civil rights,
queer.
Yeah, she's queer. Like, so it's just like a lot of what we see from the civil rights movement is so deeply rooted in religion that it's so toxic that other people that share other identities can't be a part of it. You know what I mean? And that's very frustrating coming from a place of queerness. You know what I mean? Like, because you feel like. Yeah. Even though I would have had all this knowledge, I couldn't have been a part of something like that. You know,
Black people are not a monolith. Like, and I think that like I would have loved to have seen, like, I mean, we have MLK, who is the face of the movement, and he's a straight Black man, and it's just kind of like, okay, like, where are the women that, you know, like, what, like, why is it only him being showcased? And then you had opportunities to showcase everyone. And when we talk about community, especially the Black community, all those people are in that community. So we really needed to have something that represented everybody. Yeah. And I kind of like see it being focused on straight Black men, and kind of saw that a little bit with the Black Lives Matter movement, a little bit. Like, I mean, not the actual organization, because again, the organization, but like when I'm talking about like when people in society, like, you know, we say protect Black women, but like, is it just a hashtag, or is it just something cool to say? Like, or like, I mean, you know, you have to think about like the Black women. Black women have been the result of like police brutality as well, and like the only big name that I can think of was like Breonna Taylor. Like, but there were so many other Black women who also, you know, were killed and kind of had similar situations. But we all know like the Trayvon Martins, we know the Mike Browns, we know the Fernando Castros, we know the George Floyds and stuff like that. You know, so, and it's just like one of those things where it's just like, oh, it's a woman, so like, I mean, maybe it's not going to get as much attention. You know? So I just think we have a little bit of work to do with that, and I think that Bayard Rustin, you know, he really just did. I really commend him for realizing that all of these things were were problematic, but still continuing and seeing the bigger picture and continuing to work, so I really do appreciate it about him, because like I said, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, because at the end of his life, he actually helped establish the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with MLK, but he refused to be credited on any of the work. And this is, not right before he passed, but like in his later years when he helped him do that. And some of his founding principles that he left everybody with was the fact that he believed it took everybody to be an ally. So not just Black people, not just white people, not just Asian people, not just queer people. Like we all had to be able to come together to create a strong foundation for us to live and thrive and be great on. Yeah. He's one of my personal heroes, truthfully. So I really love that we started coming out the gate with him, but he was laid to rest on August 24th, 1987 in Manhattan, where he was with his lover at the time. But very incredible guy. I hope that you all learned something about Bayard Rustin today, or this idea of intersectionality. We'll be coming at y'all again with some more episodes and some more heat, things to offer. But again, we're Bleducation. I'm Mia.
And Brando.
And we'll see y'all next time.
All right,
peace.
What up? It's your boy, Brando from the Bando. Actually, I'm from the suburbs, not the Bando, but that's okay. I'm here to say thanks for watching the Polaris Network on YouTube. For exclusive shows and premium content, subscribe to the Polaris Network on YouTube right now. Seriously, what are you doing? Go subscribe. Go do it right now.